My name is Elise Naramore. Remember, the primary purpose of this video series is to explain how the learning progression method is implemented, with a special focus on the logistics of grading. This is part 5, in which you will learn how we determine grades and share that information to students and parents. As we go through this module, I'm going to review some previous material just to make sure that it's fresh. Recall that the learning progression method has several characteristic features: skills-focused, strengths-based, achievement levels spelled out for each practice, and descriptive feedback with delayed grades, or no grades. In a class using the learning progression method, almost all assessments are formative. Formative assessment is a range of formal and informal assessment procedures conducted by teachers during the learning process in order to modify teaching and learning activities to improve student attainment. This is different from summative assessment, which are the activity we do in class that are used to generate a grade. Formative assessments have no impact on grades. They focus on feedback, yet prepare students for those summative assessments. They provide students the opportunity to gain proficiency and confidence in the skills and content that will later be assessed for a grade. It's during these times that students can identify and communicate their areas of strength and their areas of opportunity. Once those areas of opportunity are self-identified, the teacher then provides coaching and tips to develop those skills. We cycle through practice, formative assessment, and feedback until students are prepared for that summative assessment. While this is a good habit for any class, it's extremely valuable for striving learners. Trust is established and the classroom becomes a collaborative space to enhance their knowledge base. Combine that with eliminating the pressure of a lasting negative impact of a summative assessment, and they are more willing to try, have a discussion, and try again. Grading in education is the process of applying standardized measurements for varying levels of achievements in a course. Grades can be assigned as letters, as a range, as a percentage, or as a number out of a possible total. We don't need to rank and judge our students, simply to provide a clear path to learning. Many students are able to achieve high grades due to the incorporation of items that have nothing to do with understanding the material, such as simple practice, A for effort, and other types of filler. When presented with a complex question, we always ask, why can't they get it correct? How do we make sure that the grade received clearly communicates the level of understanding of that material? When I use the term score, what I mean is achievement level. I use this to distinguish it from a grade. Scores will be descriptive: beginning, developing, proficient, advanced, and expert. That's what I use. I think of it as an analogy with sports. During football season, for example, a team wins or loses based on scores during that game only. It doesn't matter how well they did on the previous game, and definitely not during the scrimmages or practices. It's only the game being played that matters. Similarly, each assessment stands alone. We look at the scores earned on a lab report, for example, and discuss the strengths and weaknesses on that assessment and set goals for the next time. We also look at patterns. The goal is to improve over time so that by the time you get to the end of practicing, you are ready for that final game. As described in part 3, we created and used these 6 levels for each of our learning progressions. Each level is generally associated with the keyword written here, but the learning progression fully fleshes out what that means for each practice. In other words, what does try look like for experimental design as compared to problem solving? Well, let's look at that. Beginning for experimental design requires that students state the task, collect and present data, and provide a description of the procedure followed. Beginning for problem solving doesn't require that. It requires that students attempt to solve the problem. While both represent trying, we thought about what would it look like to try at that particular practice. What minimum would a student need to do to demonstrate an authentic and sincere attempt? And so on for the other levels. The achievement levels have no inherent meaning, positive or negative. The level simply communicates what the student can do. The judgment will only come from a combination of the student's personal goal and whether or not the student is progressing over time. Then exactly what are the scores for? The most important things to note are: scores are not averaged. Everything matters and nothing counts, as we discussed earlier. The scores required to earn a particular grade are published at the beginning of the school year. What matters is the amount of each achievement level present at the time of assessment. We will be digging into all of these much more deeply in the grade translation video, part 7. I will present several examples when we get to it, I promise. The most common question I get from both parents and students: how do I know how I'm doing in this class if there's no grade? So there are 2 places to look: Genesis and Canvas. Genesis is the student information system that we use. In addition to student data such as address, contact information, and schedule, for example, it's a web-based recording system that teachers must use to report student grades. Canvas is what we use for our learning management system. It's most commonly used by individual teachers like myself to provide access to lesson materials and assignments and scoring of those assignments. I use Genesis to communicate student scores at the end of each unit. Therefore, scores on Genesis will not change until the end of that unit. At that point, all previous scores will be replaced by updated results. On Canvas, I will post descriptive feedback and scores for all individual assessments that I collect. Grades will only be posted on Genesis as mandated by the district administration, primarily at the end of each semester. However, updated scores will be posted within a week of the end of a unit. I do my best to update scores on Canvas within a week. For example, if I collect the lab report on Wednesday, I usually get them scored and returned before the next lab report is submitted sometime early the next week. I hate having assignments pile up on my to-do list, so you can rest assured I will get them back to you as quickly as possible. To view scores on Genesis, you must actually open up the class. It's going to say capital NG almost all year on the Grades tab. You have to click on Physics to see the list of practices with your current scores. I always accompany every score with a comment so you can easily interpret whether or not you are on track. To view scores on Canvas, open up the original assignment, then on View Feedback to see written annotations, and View Rubric to see scores for that assignment. Remember, the grade you have does not matter at all until the very end of the year. More importantly, we will talk as often as you like to better understand where you are at and where you have areas of opportunity. Instead of a grade book in Genesis with individual assignment scores, you will see a very different presentation if you are my student. Note, other teachers are going to do this differently. This is my view as a teacher. It displays all 20 of my students. I'm not showing you their names. Each row is a different student. When you or your parent goes into Genesis, you will only see your information, and instead of it being horizontally displayed, it's going to be vertical. I don't have access to that view, so this is what we're stuck with. So let's look across the top. It begins with a progress report in the far left, which is my way of telling you if I'm concerned. If you have outstanding or satisfactory, then all is well. If there's a U or unsatisfactory, then you should make an appointment with me so we can have a conversation. The second column is a grade, which is only going to be populated in January after the close of the semester. The next 10 columns in pink are the 10 practices. These are populated at the end of Unit 1. They are changed to a new score at the end of Unit 2 and again at the end of Unit 3. It can go up or down depending on your performance on the unit's last lab report, the unit test, and the unit project. The remaining columns, which are shaded blue, are simply a description of how many assignments you completed that week. We use this for communication purposes only. Only the first 5 weeks are showing here because I couldn't fit it all, but this continues for all 20 weeks of the semester. A couple other things. Note that every column has a times 0.0 next to it. This means that these assignments have 0 weight towards the average. Also note the red pin that denotes a comment or explanation for each post. Usually I say what the target level is for that unit and if you need to see me for help. All of this information is easy to view on your student or parent gradebook as long as you actually open the file. I personally export Canvas scores to Excel and manipulate them so I can see patterns. My colleagues do not. I do this for the following reasons. Because I replace scores on Genesis, I need a place to record the results for all the units somewhere. And I really want to look for trends, and Excel is a terrific tool for this. I have translated the achievement levels in Canvas or Genesis to numerical values in Excel. This is necessary in order to create graphs and look for trends. While I do not average scores for students, I certainly find statistical analysis useful for myself. I want to share some of the interesting information that I gleaned from doing this. I find the averages on individual practices in order to track class progress on each practice over time. This helps me to identify target levels for the next unit. I also find the average for each student. This helps me to identify if anyone is markedly ahead or behind overall, and therefore I can differentiate instruction. I can also compare it to their average from a previous unit for a quick and dirty way to make sure that they are progressing. Just note the color coding is my way of letting myself know who I'm very concerned about requiring a call home or conferencing. I am explaining this in order to let you know that this course is never on autopilot. I do not just assume because student A did well, student B is doing that too. I'm constantly monitoring individual performance and providing customized support, including extra help, calls home, and visits to guidance. No one falls off my radar. This bar chart is also generated from Excel, and it shows how effective the learning progression method is over the course of the year. Along the sides, the practices are, and along the bottom, you can see numerical values which represent the average score for all students. Here's the legend showing that each colored bar represents performance for a different unit. Look at the first practice, which has a bar for each of the 6 units. You can see that the general trend from bottom to top is improvement over time. I create this at the end of each unit in order to track class progress. If I see the class struggling in a particular area, such as graph interpretation, look at the end of Unit 3, and the engineering design process at the ends of Units 4 and 5, there were setbacks. So then I focus a lot of time on those particular skills. So I'm showing you this in order to let you know that the class is not on autopilot. I do not assume that just because last year's class did a certain way, this year's class will as well. I am constantly monitoring the class as a whole and making adjustments as needed. In the next module, I'm going to describe the types of feedback that students receive from me and how you can use it to figure out how students are doing.